In the UK, the forever prison sentence, otherwise known as a whole life order, is hardly ever given out. And frankly, I think that's exactly where our judicial system goes wrong. Enjoy. Steve Wright, who was born in 1958, is known in the media as the Suffolk Strangler, the man behind the Ipswich serial killings of late 2006. Between the 30th of October and the 10th of December 2006, the bodies of 5 women, who all happened to be sex workers, were discovered at different locations near Ipswich in Suffolk, England. While their bodies were discovered naked, there were no signs of SA. 2 of the victims, Annalie Alderton and Paula Clennell, were confirmed to have been killed by strangling. The cause of death of the other 3 victims, Gemma Adams, Tanya Nicol and Annette Nichols, was never established, the perpetrator himself staying silent on the matter. Similarly, the man has never said why he killed the 5 women. Was it due to resentment of and disgust for women who sell sex, like the case of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper? Who knows? What is known, though, is that Wright himself was a long-standing user of sex workers. Wright got his whole life order in 2008. Levi Bellfield is literally evil by name. Born in 1968, he's a serial killer, a sex offender, a rapist, a kidnapper and a burglar. He's also a woman beater. He had numerous relationships which spawned him, I think, 10 or 11 children, and many of those relationships collapsed because he used to beat the you-know-what out of his girlfriend and wives. He was married to some of them and just living with others just as a boyfriend and girlfriend set up. In 2008, he was convicted of the murders of Marsha McDonnell and Emily de la Grange and of the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy, and he got a whole life order. And then in 2011, he was found guilty of the murder of schoolgirl Millie Dowler, and he again received a whole life order for that murder as well. So he's got 2 whole life orders, and he was in fact the first prisoner in the UK to receive 2 whole life orders.
Did you get a kick out of being involved in these sort of inquiries?
No comment.
Do you think it's a macho type of thing to hear?
No.
Do you think it will help your notoriety?
No comment.
Do you honestly believe that your actions over the 21st and the 22nd of March 2002 are the actions of an innocent man?
No comment.
Then are you an innocent man?
No comment.
Because if you are, tell us.
No comment.
And give us that explanation for where you were and what you were doing.
No comment.
Are you able to do that, Leroy?
No comment.
Sarah's told you what she believes you did that particular day, and I wholly support what she says. I believe you took her off the street that day. I believe your motivation was sexual, and I believe you took her back to Collingwood Place, and I believe you killed her there. That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
That's what happened.
No comment.
And then you've used the day of next year to move her body. Is that the truth?
No.
Because that's what's happened, isn't it?
No comment.
And then sometime over the following few days, you've driven down to Hampshire, an area that you know, and you've dumped her body.
No comment, sir.
That's the truth, isn't it?
No comment, sir.
He once, as a child, had SHX with a rabbit, and afterwards he broke the rabbit's neck. His original surname was none other than Rabbit. Rabbetts. He used to sleep with his mother. I don't think they did the thing together, but they used to sleep in the same bed for many, many years. I think well into Levi's teens. And whenever he used to go home and see his mother as an adult, again, he used to sleep in the same bed as her. She wiped his botty bot for him until he was around 12. And he also, before he took to murder, was alleged to have committed a number of essays against young girls when he worked as a nightclub bouncer. But even though the man is as thick as you know what, somehow he was always able to destroy the DNA evidence that he left behind, and so he was never caught. And the police in many cases didn't take the allegations from the girls who came forward about him seriously. A lot of them took drugs and stuff like that, and the police really just didn't care. And so that is the story of Levi Bellfield. In July of the year 2000, down in Hersham in Surrey, 41-year-old Roy Whiting abducted and murdered 8-year-old Sarah Payne. In May 2008, up in Huddersfield, West Yorkshire, 21-year-old Subhan Anwar murdered Sanam Nafsakar, the 2-year-old daughter of his then partner, Zabina Nafsakar. In 2010, Whiting's original 50-year sentence was cut to 40 years. Anwar, meanwhile, only got 23 years. So what are these two murderers doing in this presentation? Well, this particular chapter is less about them and more about the murderers Gary Smith, Lee Newell and Gary Vinter. In 1996, Gary Vinter, who was born around 1970, got 10 years for the stabbing murder of his 22-year-old work colleague, Carl Eden. Then, less than 2 years after getting out, he stabbed to death his estranged wife, Anne White, which earned him his whole life prison order. Gary Smith, who was born in 1965, did his first murder alongside another man in 1998. Lee Newell, who was born in 1969, became a murderer in 1988 when he murdered his 56-year-old neighbour. But both Smith and Newell only got a life sentence, giving them, as such, every chance of getting out at some point. So again, why am I talking about them? Well, these two murderers now have practically zero chance of ever seeing freedom again, having each been given, in 2013, a whole life order for strangling Subhan Anwar to death with his own pyjamas in his cell at HMP Long Lartin in February 2013. In February 2016, meanwhile, Gary Vinter got himself another life sentence for his attempted murder of Lee Newell from November 2014. This act of Vinter's, which he perpetrated by repeatedly kicking Newell in the head, was the man's way of protesting not having yet got the transfer to a prison with a better gym that he had requested months before. An officer from HMP Woodhill, the prison in question, reported that after doing what he did to Newell, which ended up leaving the man blind in one eye, Vinter remarks to officers, quote, "That's what happens when you mess me about," unquote. Prior to this violent act, in 2011, Vinter stabbed Roy Whiting in the eyes with a sharpened toilet brush handle before kicking and punching the man as he lay on the floor. In explanation of this attack, Vinter told the court that it was because Whiting was, quote, "a dirty little nonce," unquote. It emerged at some point either before or after Vinter's courtroom testimony that the attacker's true motive was to get himself better prison conditions. Don't ask me how doing what he did was actually supposed to achieve that. In any event, after getting hospital treatment, Whiting made a full recovery. That said, in 2018, 2 of his fellow inmates jumped him while in 2024 he was once again stabbed. Honestly, murderers attacking and murdering other murderers. While Simon Wilson, who was born in 1957, is a murderer, his whole life order doesn't come directly from his act of murder. On being moved to Australia with his family at the age of 2, Wilson racked up a total of 77 offences over there, including 6 rapes and a vicious murder. After serving 16 years in prison for that murder, in January 2008, at 50, Wilson was deported back to England. On his return to the UK, however, the man learned that his case was found not to meet the criteria to put him under any control orders, which left him free to do whatever he wanted and go wherever he wanted. Likewise, the authorities were powerless to force Wilson to sign the SHE ex-offender register, the man choosing not to do so on a voluntary basis. A few months on, in September 2008, the man was given a whole life order after pleading guilty to attempted rape, wounding with intent, and causing a person to engage in sexual activity without her consent. In April 2008, you see, Wilson attacked a 71-year-old woman, who we'll call Lucy, on her doorstep in central London, slashing her across the face and across her body as he tried to rape her. Lucy had to be hospitalised for 5 days and was left so badly injured from the attack that she was at risk of losing the use of one of her arms. Wilson lost his 2009 appeal against his whole life order. As a convicted murderer, however, he isn't quite in the same category as either Jeremy Wing or another non-murderer whole lifer, John Wass, who you're soon to meet. Marc Chivers, who was born in 1967, is the son of a British Army officer who was serving in Germany. Chivers was born and raised in Germany. In 1986, he met a lady called Sabine Rappold, and she soon became his girlfriend. In 1992, he strangled her with a rope and then buried her body in a shallow grave in Woodland and went on the run. He was caught and arrested 3 months later, and in 1993, he got a life sentence in Stuttgart. After doing 15 years for the murder of Sabine, in 2007 he was released but deported back to the UK. In July 2008, he had a girlfriend by this point and he attacked her. Her name was Maria Stubbings. He got 4 months in jail for battery of Maria, but they stayed together, and there were a number of other occasions when Chivers got out that Maria called the police on him, but nothing came of it until one point the police came round after Maria Stubbings got them over, but Chivers is the one who answered the door, and he told the police that she'd gone out. And then a few days later, in fact it was the very next day, they came round the first occasion on the 18th of December 2008. And they came back the next day and they found Maria's body, which was hidden under a pile of clothes in the downstairs bathroom. This time Chivers strangled her with a dog lead. Perhaps he just didn't have any rope handy. He got his whole life order in December 2009. On the 3rd of April 2010, John Maden, who had an obsessive interest in pornography that related to unophilia, rape and torture, called his sister Lynn and asked for Lynn's daughter, his niece, to go to his home in Cheetham Hill in order to babysit his 10-year-old daughter. When Tia arrived, which was at 3 p.m, her uncle drugged her with an antipsychotic tranquilizer that he himself had been prescribed. After doing so, he inflicted a horrific catalogue of injuries on his niece before stabbing her and then strangling her with a ligature made from a guitar string. At 3:45 p.m, Maden phoned the 999 emergency services and said, quote, "Hi, I would like to report a murder," unquote. And then when he was asked by the operator what had happened, or rather why he had done what he had done, he answered, quote, "Because I felt like it," unquote. He got his whole life order in October 2010. Born in 1971, in 1989, Desmond Lee murdered his landlady, Shirley Carr, by strangling her with his bare hands. His reason for killing her was that she had taunted him over the breakup of his first gay relationship. He pled not guilty to murder but was convicted anyway, and he did 14 years, and he got out in 2004. Now, after getting out, he got a new boyfriend, a man called Christopher Pratt, who was actually a married father of 2. And then on one occasion, the 15th of August 2009 to be exact, over at Mr. Pratt's home in Sackville Street, Lee killed his lover by breaking his voice box and by breaking a bone in his neck. The body of Mr. Pratt was still in the flat when Lee stole the man's credit card and debit cards, and with those cards he paid off a phone bill, bought alcohol for a party with his neighbours, ordered more than £200 worth of food from Asda, and attempted to buy £1,181 worth of goods from Argos. In court, this time he admitted to killing Mr. Pratt, but he claimed it was a freak sex accident. In April 2010, he got his whole life order. Wilbert Anthony Dyce got away with the murders of a mother and her 2 children for nearly 3 decades. Dyce was 26 when he raped and stabbed Norma Richards, 27, to death after following her home from a nightclub on the 17th of July 1982. He then stabbed her 9-year-old daughter Samantha to death and drowned 7-year-old Siretta in the bath at their flat at 54 Kingsgate Estate, Dalston, East London. Dyce, whose own mother lived just a few hundred yards away, left the scene after daubing the NF for National Front symbol on the walls in an attempt to make the murder look like a racist murder. The bodies of all 3 victims were found 2 days later on July the 19th by their grandmother Myra and by the stepsister of the 2 girls, Rodine. The murder weapon may have been a 19th century bayonet, which was kept in the flat as an ornament. Nobody suspected Dyce's involvement, his name was never given to the police, and he was never interviewed. It was only during a review in 2009, which was sparked by a query from a journalist researching a book about the footballer Laurie Cunningham, the brother of Norma's partner, that his DNA was matched to semen samples that were found at the scene. Confronted with this damning evidence, Dyce claimed that he had had sex with Norma Richards in the toilet of a nearby club hours before her death. He was convicted, however, of all 3 murders on the 17th of December 2010 after a trial at the Old Bailey. The court heard that he had also sexually attacked 2 other women in their own homes and stabbed his ex-wife. At the age of 54, Dyce was jailed for life with a whole life order. Between 2009 and 2010, Stephen Griffiths, who comes from Bradford in Yorkshire, murdered 3 women, 43-year-old Susan Rushworth, 31-year-old Shirley Armitage and 36-year-old Suzanne Blamyers. All 3 women happened to be sex workers. Griffiths killed his victims with a crossbow and also claimed to have cannibalised any 1 or more of them, although that latter claim has never been proven. He got his whole life order in 2010, and while in prison he has attempted suicide on several occasions, but staff have always caught him in time. And in 2011 he went on a 120-day hunger strike, during which time he avoided contact with other people. But there is such a crazy irony to this guy's story. In 2009, he went to the University of Bradford to write a PhD in homicide studies. John Sweeney, who was born in 1958, murdered 2 girlfriends of his 10 years apart and was already banged up for the attempted murder of another girlfriend of his when he learned that he was getting a whole life order for his 2 murders. A carpenter, Sweeney murdered Melissa Halstead, 33, a former model from Ohio in the US in 1990, before murdering Paula Fields, 31, a mother of 3 living in North London in 2000. He hacked each woman to death, dismembered them each, and then dumped their remains in canals in London and in Rotterdam. Likewise, he attempted to kill a 3rd girlfriend with both an axe and a knife. I have no idea why the man did what he did. Police, furthermore, think he may have committed 3 other murders too. Sweeney got his whole life order in 2011. George Johnson is a double murderer. He did 20 years of a life sentence for a murder that he committed in the course of a burglary that came in 1986. Then when he got out in 2011, he murdered 89-year-old Florence Habish in February in order to get money to fund his drug addiction. It was a fully premeditated murder as well. He got his whole life order in 2011. John William Cooper, who was born in 1944, is also known as the Bullseye Killer, and he's a Welsh serial killer. On the 26th of May 2011, he was given a whole life order for the 1985 double murder of siblings Richard and Helen Thomas, and for the 1989 double murder of Peter and Gwenda Dixon. The murders were known in the media as the Pembrokeshire murders or the coastal murders, because that's where the murders took place, and because of those murders, tourism in that area dropped dramatically. Cooper was also sentenced for the rape of a 16-year-old girl and a sexual assault on a 15-year-old girl, both of those attacks having been carried out while a group of 5 teenagers were held at gunpoint in March 1996 in a wooded area behind the Mount Estate in Cooper's hometown of Milford Haven in Pembrokeshire. David Baxendale was born in 1971. In 2001, out in Spain, he got 11 years for the murder of his friend, who he stabbed 14 times while he was under the influence of drink and drugs. After only 7 years, though, in June 2008, he was released and deported back to the UK. On the 10th of May 2010, a friend of his who lived in a flat in Redhill, he met this lady called Sarah Thomas, and the two seemed to have, got a liking for one another, and then they got a taxi back to Sarah's flat around 5 p.m. She lived in High Street, Nutfield Village, and then for reasons that I just don't know, Baxendale murdered her. He stabbed her several times with the fatal wound going straight through her neck. In March 2011, Baxendale got his whole life prison order. Andrew Dawson, who was born in 1962, has killed all of 3 people in his lifetime, and he did so between 1981 and 2010. In August 1981, in his native Ormskirk up in Lancashire, Dawson murdered his first victim, Henry Walsh. Mr. Walsh was a shopkeeper who was 91 years old at the time of his murder, and Dawson stabbed the man 11 times. Dawson was convicted of Mr. Walsh's murder in 1982, but was released on licence in 1999. On the 25th of July 2010, John David Matthews was found stabbed to death in his flat in the Derby area of Chaddesden. 5 days later, in the same area, Paul Hancock was also fatally stabbed. And you'll never guess who stabbed them both. On both occasions, Dawson placed the bodies of his victims in a bathtub of their respective flat so that he could get rid of their odours. On the same day that Matthew's body had been found, Dawson was arrested in Whitehaven, which is in Cumbria. On the 18th of July 2011, he got his whole life order. Even though the body of 5-year-old Welsh girl April Jones has never been found, Mark Bridger, who was born around 1966, is doing a whole life order for her murder. Around 7:30 on the 1st of October 2012, after letting her little girl play out, April's mother couldn't find April and she straight away called 999. The first officer on the scene spoke to a child's witness who reported having seen April climbing into a grey van. The police immediately upgraded the investigation to a critical incident and launched a massive search for April, which soon brought them to the front door of Mark Bridger. Bridger said that he had accidentally run April over, but that, due to having been drunk, he couldn't remember what he'd done with the body. Nobody believed him, and in 2013, after being found guilty of April's abduction and murder, and also of perverting the course of justice, he got his whole life prison order. Dale Cregan's murder of 2 women police officers in 2012 was as vile and shocking as it was gratuitous. Fiona Bone, 32, and Nicola Hughes, 23, were out on a routine patrol on the 18th of September 2012 when they were sent to Abbey Gardens in Hattersley, Tameside in Greater Manchester. This was at about 11 a.m. and it was in response to a report of criminal damage. Someone had phoned up and said that some random person had thrown a pavement slab through their window. The person who made that call was well-known gangster Dale Cregan, only the person taking the call didn't know that at the time. When Miss Bone and Miss Hughes turned up to Cregan's home, he opened fire on them, he shot at them, he threw a grenade at them. Fiona Bone died at the scene while Nicola Hughes was badly wounded and died later in hospital. And Dale Cregan's reason for doing that was that he was fed up with the police constantly constantly questioning him and members of his family, going around to their home, all in investigation of a murder. I think it was about 2 murders actually that Cregan had recently carried out. That was literally Cregan's reason for taking the lives of these 2 women. Cregan got his whole life order in June 2013. In 2013, Jamie Reynolds, who was born around 1990, murdered the 17-year-old daughter of a police officer and then had SEX with her dead body. And he did all of this after spending months writing a twisted tale describing how he would do it. He first of all built a so-called hanging mechanism in the loft hatch of his parents' home over in Wellington in Telford. And then at some point he was able to somehow lure Georgia Williams, an A-level student, over to his home for a fake photo shoot. Georgia agreed to pose for Reynolds while wearing lipstick, stilettos and leather shorts, which he had bought on the internet. In a picture found by the police, Georgia can be seen grinning at the camera with a noose around her neck on the landing of the house. And then moments later, Reynolds throttled his victim with the rope before hanging her from the noose in order to fulfill his sick fantasies, which had been fueled by his obsession with violent pornography. When he was caught, Reynolds was examined by psychiatrists who all agreed that if he hadn't been caught, he would have gone on to become a serial killer. He got his whole life order in 2013. For reasons that aren't known to anyone other than the perpetrator, in 2013, former soldier Anwar Rosser, who was born around 1980, murdered a 4-year-old boy who lived in the home that Anwar Rosser had been allowed to stay in for the night. I can't find exactly how Rosser did what he did, but having been described as a psychotic, bullying alcoholic, he murdered the little boy, whose name is Riley Turner, while the little boy was sleeping. He got his whole life order in 2014. Ian McLaughlin was born in 1958. Between 1970 and 1983, he was in and out of prison for a range of offences, including burglary and theft. In 1983, he beat his boyfriend, Lendell Gatti, over the head with a hammer and then strangled him with a towel. He was convicted of manslaughter and got 10 years, but that was reduced on appeal to 8 years, and then the man was released after only 5 years anyway. In September 1991, he got his new boyfriend, a barman called Peter Halls, to lie on the bed in a fantasy game and then killed him by stabbing him in the back. In 1992, he got life with a minimum of 25 years. In July 2012, he was let out of prison on day release, and he decided to use that day release to go around the home of ex-prisoner and SE ex-offender, 86-year-old Francis Corey Wright, who he'd met in prison, and rob him. And so that's what he did. He tied Corey Wright up while he searched his house, and he was just about to leave with a pillowcase full of family heirlooms when a neighbour by the name of Graham Buck came over to investigate the shouting that he'd heard. McLaughlin dragged Mr. Buck into the house and then killed him by stabbing him in the neck. In 2014, the 40-year minimum term that McLaughlin had got in 2013 for the murder of Mr. Buck was upgraded to a whole life order. On the afternoon of the 22nd of May 2013, a British Army soldier, Drummer Lee Rigby of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, was attacked and killed by Michael Adibolajo and Michael Adibowale near the Royal Artillery Barracks in Woolwich, South East London. Both men were Muslim converts. 29-year-old Adibolajo was found guilty of Rigby's murder on the 19th of December 2013, and so was Adibowale. However, their sentencing was delayed due to the pending outcome of the High Court's decision on life sentences following the European Court of Human Rights ruling in July that year. On the 26th of February 2014, after the High Court ruled that whole life sentences were still lawful, provided that they were reviewed after 25 years, Adibolajo was sentenced at the Central Criminal Court to a whole life order. Adibowale didn't get whole life, but he did get 45 years as a minimum term and is unlikely to be released until at least 2058, when he'll be 67. He may well never be released. The three men that Joanna Dennehy murdered in March 2013 were none other than her friends, her sexual partners to be exact. When she was little, Joanna Dennehy was a very kind, caring, sensitive girl, very close to her sister. She was a very academically gifted pupil who had aspirations of becoming a lawyer, until one day in her teens, for reasons that people just can't explain, she changed. She got into drugs, she got into drink, she got into sex. She she ran off with a bloke who was a lot older than her that she came onto, had a couple of babies with him. Then that relationship broke down. She went to prison, came out, got in with some really, really dodgy characters, and then in March 2013 killed 3 people and tried to kill another 2. She said that the reason she did it is because she wanted to see if she was as evil and as cold-hearted as she thought she was, and that after she killed the first person, she had to keep going. It was moreish and she couldn't get enough. She was convicted in 2014 along with the 3 men, her so-called undertakers that had helped her, in particular by getting rid of the bodies. And in fact, Joanna Dennehy's killings were known as the Peterborough ditch murders because they dumped the bodies in a ditch out in Peterborough in Cambridgeshire. The 3 accomplices were given finite terms, and I think at least one of them has since been released. Dennehy herself got her whole life order in 2014. Paul O'Hara's first murder was that of his girlfriend Janine Waterworth in, I think, 1998, or at least that's when he was sentenced for her murder. And then he was released around 2013, and of course on being released he went over to the home of his new girlfriend, Shirley Shenan, and that's where she was given evidence to 2 police officers about the domestic abuse that she'd suffered at the hands of O'Hara. He burst in, attacked the 2 police officers with a hammer, chased Shenan into the street, and then on catching up with her, he stabbed her to death. He got his whole life order in 2014. Ryan Matthews committed 2 murders and got life for those murders in 1983. On getting out, he went and murdered a healthcare assistant called Sharon Wall at Wootton Hill Hospital in Gloucester. He did that on the 9th of July 2014. Matthews left Broadmoor Secure Hospital in 1999 under the Mental Health Act, and his mental health had deteriorated throughout stays in various hospitals following his release. Matthews, who used to be known as Stephen Cecil King, got his whole life order in 2015. Double murderer David Mitchell, who was born around 1968, is gay. However, originally he was straight. The proof of that is the fact that in 1990 he murdered his girlfriend. He did his second murder, which was that of his gay lover, Robert Hind, 4 months after getting out of prison for the murder of his girlfriend. He murdered Robert Hind in the hostel that they were both living in after getting out of prison, where they met in December 2013. And his apparent reason for the murder was that he was really angry when, after they had sex, Hind told him that he was HIV positive. The court, however, when this came to trial, didn't believe him for a minute. They reckoned that he had known about it long before then, and therefore that wasn't the reason why he killed Robert Hind. He got his whole life order in 2015. Born in 1970 or thereabouts, in 2001 Jason Gomez stabbed his business partner Robert Jones to death. I believe their business was a window cleaning business. Then on the 25th of March 2015, together with a fellow inmate called Paul Watkin, Gomez lured another inmate called Darren Flynn into a cell at HMP Swellside and then stabbed him over 190 times with a thin black handle and a knife wrapped in material. I have no idea why the 2 men did what they did to the victim. Gomez got his whole life order in 2015. Ian Burley's first murder was that of 69-year-old Maurice Hoyle, and for that murder he did 18 years. And then in July 2015, when he was 43, together with his girlfriend, a 39-year-old called Helen Nichols, he followed a 65-year-old man called John Gogarty to his home in Roomwell, which is near Barnsley in South Yorkshire, before demanding his PIN and then stabbing him 69 times. The girlfriend, Helen Nichols, got 20 years for the murder, while Burley got whole life. That happened in 2015. Russell Oliver, yet another prisoner who's inside for murder and commits a murder again while inside. On the 31st of May 2015, Russell Oliver, who was then aged 46, attacked another prisoner called John York in his cell at the high security prison HMP Long Lartin. York himself was jailed for life in 2013 for beating a man to death. He died from the head injuries that Oliver inflicted on him. Oliver got his whole life order in 2016. Anthony Ayres, another man who killed two women several years apart, with a prison sentence for the first murder coming in between. So his first murder is the one that he committed in 1994, and the woman that he murdered was none other than his girlfriend. After he got out, which he did in May 2012, he kept a low profile for 3 years, and then on the 19th of November 2015, for whatever reason, he murdered 36-year-old mother of one, Kelly Pierce, at a friend's flat in Canvey in Essex. He stabbed Kelly 40 times and then beat her to death. He got his whole life order in 2016. On the 19th of October 2012, Christopher Halliwell pleaded guilty to the murder of Sian O'Callaghan, a lady that he'd picked up outside a nightclub in Swindon in March 2011 before stabbing her to death. He got life with a minimum of 25 years. While he was under arrest for Sian's murder, he confessed to killing another woman several years earlier, the lady being 20-year-old Becky Godden, but the High Court decided that his confession wasn't admissible because in some way it had been obtained illegally. Thankfully, 4 years later, police found fresh evidence unconnected to Halliwell's earlier confession, and on that evidence he was convicted of Becky Gordon's murder, and on the basis of that second murder conviction he got his whole life order. That came in 2016. Arthur Simpson-Kent. You'll remember that I said that the story of Rashan Arshad, who butchered his whole family, wouldn't be the only story of someone who annihilated their whole family. Arthur Simpson-Kent murdered his partner, who was a former EastEnders actress called Cyan Blake, and she was 43, and he also killed their two sons, Zachary, aged 8, and Amon, aged 4. He did so by beating and stabbing all three of them at their home in Erith in London in December 2015. Police believe that Simpson-Kent committed the murders because Cyan was planning to leave him. He buried the bodies of the three victims in the garden and then ran away to Ghana, but he was later caught and brought back to the UK. He got his whole life order in October 2016. During the Brexit vote of 2016, Thomas Mair, a far-right activist, anti-immigration, anti-anything that isn't white and British, murdered Labour MP Jo Cox. He did that in Birstall in West Yorkshire on the 16th of June 2016. Mair had researched and laid out an assassination plan, and at the point when he attacked Jo Cox, a member of the public tried to rescue her, but Mair then attacked him and stabbed him. And I'm really sorry to say that I don't know either the name of that wonderful man or what became of him. Mair got his whole life order in 2016. Stephen Port, who was born in 1975, is not only a serial killer, but also a serial rapist. Between 2014 and 2015, Paul murdered 4 young men that he met online. He'd get them to come over to his flat over in Barking in East London, and there he would drug them with GHB, gamma hydroxybutyric acid, quite a well-known date grape drug, and then of course grape them, and all 4 victims died from an overdose of the drug. In the case of one victim, Paul inserted the drug, or rather injected it, directly into the man's you-know-what hole. Paul got his whole life order in 2016. To this day, though, apparently he denies any of the murders. Leroy Campbell embarked on his career as a violent criminal with the offence of rape. He did 17 years for the rape of a woman. After that, when he got out, he then raped as well as murdered a nurse called Lisa Skidmore by strangling her with a ligature. This was in Bilston. He also then tried to murder the woman's mother by strangling her with a vacuum cord. Then he tried to cover his tracks by setting fire to Lisa's room and leaving items with other people's DNA on them. The man had only been released 4 months earlier after the 17 years that he did for rape. He got his well-deserved whole life order in 2017. Billy Wright. He murdered his girlfriend, Lucy Aries, in 2015, and then he got sentenced to 15 years as the minimum term of his life sentence. But then when he was in prison, like others before him, he murdered a fellow prisoner, someone called Brett Rogers. And the man himself was a convicted murderer. But as I say, murderers murdering other murderers, it's still murder, and it doesn't make any of them a hero. This was again at HMP Long Lartin, which is in Worcestershire. He got a whole life order in 2017. John Wass is in the same position as Jeremy Wing on a whole life order for a crime other than murder. Wass was 69 when he was convicted of 17 counts of historical child abuse. Can't say the word because of YouTube's decency policies. And these offences included grape, SA and sexual exposure against 3 different victims going back to the 60s. He got his whole life tariff at Derby Crown Court in 2017. Alan Maidman has got convictions for robberies and for possessing a knife and for 2 murders. He got his first murder conviction and he served his time and then he got out. But then 9 months later in 2017, he murdered again. It was a man that he believed had assaulted his girlfriend. He murdered that man by stabbing him 32 times. He got his whole life order in 2017. Eerily enough, before jointly murdering a lady called Quen Ngok Nguyen in August 2017, Stephen Irwin and William McFall had each murdered a pensioner and done time for that. They got Miss Nguyen to come to a property under false pretences, and then Unwin raped her, and then afterwards he drove her to a remote location and set her on fire. He then drove to a cash machine and withdrew money from her bank account while the lady burned. The 2 men got their whole life order in 2018. John Taylor got his first life sentence for a string of sexual offences that he committed from 1977 to 1987, and they include some of the most horrendous types of sexual offences that there are. Alongside those offences were grievous bodily harm and many, many other offences. He got his second life sentence in June 2002 for the murder of Lian Tianan, and that second life sentence in fact turned into a whole life order imposed on him in 2018. There are numerous videos documenting the life and horrendous crimes of hitman Mark Fellows, who got his whole life order in 2019 after his second murder. He actually worked as a chef, as you know, a day job, and went killing by night, I guess. He also ran marathons, and in fact I think a smartwatch of his or some kind of fitness app was something that helped nail him for the murder of Paul Massey. He was also found guilty of the shooting murder of John Kinsella. This was all up in Liverpool. On the 20th of June 2020, in Forbury Gardens, a public park located in Reading, Berkshire, Khairi Saadallah stabbed to death James Furlong, 36, David Wales, 49, and Joe Ritchie Bennett, 39. It was a terrorist atrocity. The judge of the trial, Mr. Justice Sweeney, said, quote, "During the course of the attack and afterwards, and because he was seeking to advance a political, religious or ideological cause, the defendant was shouting in Arabic, 'God is the greatest and God accept my jihad,' unquote." Saadallah picked up his whole life order in 2021. Wayne Couzens was allowed to appeal his whole life order for the murder that he committed in March 2021. However, in the space of less than 10 seconds, the Court of Appeal dismissed his appeal.
Couzens seeks leave to appeal against sentence. In his case, we grant leave to appeal against sentence but dismiss the appeal.
Wayne Couzens was a Metropolitan Police officer. In March 2021, he did a bogus arrest of a 33-year-old marketing executive called Sarah Everard, stopping her on the street and telling her that as she was out on the street, she was in breach of COVID restrictions and she had to go with him to the police station. What he in fact did was to drive her out of London and all the way down to Kent, grape her and then strangle her to death with his police belt. He then burnt her body in a fridge in some woods. It was in an area of some woodland that he actually owned. There was a subsequent inquiry into the behaviour of Wayne Couzens during his career as a police officer, and it was concluded that there were so many missed opportunities to disrupt and halt the man's offending. He did things like flashing on a number of occasions. He was addicted to extreme pornography and tried to get his colleagues to watch it with him. He had a warning at one point for being excessively violent during an arrest. He went missing at one point. He was in loads and loads of debt, and when that happens, a police officer can be kicked out of the force because having money problems makes them more susceptible to bribery and corruption. Couzens got his whole life order in 2021. For many years, David Fuller, who was an electrician in a hospital in Kent, which has since been closed down, got away with the 2 murders that he committed. They were of Wendy Nell, who was 25, and Caroline Pearce, who was 20. He committed those down in Royal Tunbridge, Wales. They were known as the Bedsit murders. He was eventually caught for those murders and given a whole life order, and along with that he was given a sentence of 12 years for the SA of more than 100 female corpses in 2 hospital mortuaries, and he did those offences over a period of 12 years. The judge of Fuller's trial said that Fuller, quote, had no regard for the dignity of the dead, unquote. Fuller's whole life order came in 2021. In October 2020, over a period of 7 days, Anthony Russell murdered 3 people. On the 23rd of October 2020, a lady called Julie Williams, 58, phoned West Midlands Police to report that her son, David Williams, 31, hadn't been seen since the 21st of October. On the 25th of October, West Midlands Police were called by Miss Williams' sister to report that Miss Williams herself, Julie Williams, was now also missing. Police officers forced their way into Miss Williams' house and found her dead on the living room floor. Russell, of course, knew that the police were onto him and went on the run. Before he claimed his final victim, he attacked 2 other people who happened to be elderly people. He then tricked 31-year-old Nicole McGregor, who at the time was 18 weeks pregnant, into meeting him in a secluded spot on the promise of drugs, and that's where he murdered her. Russell got his whole life order in March 2022. Harbi Ali is an Islamic terrorist. In October 2021, he murdered Conservative MP Sir David Amis. He stabbed him more than 20 times while attending a constituency surgery. Ali pleaded not guilty to murder, but then didn't dispute much of the evidence against him in court. He had also plotted to murder other MPs, all in revenge against those, including Amis, who had voted for airstrikes against Syria. He got his whole life order in 2022. It almost feels as if there was literally no crime that Hakeem Kigundu didn't commit. He was an illegal immigrant. He was given an eviction notice due to his persistent antisocial behaviour, and that notice triggered him to set fire to the block of flats where he lived, which was in Reading in Berkshire. The fire claimed 2 lives, that of Richard Burgess and that of Neil Morris. It also seriously injured 2 others. The man got a whole life order in 2022. Damien Bendall committed his horrendous acts under the influence of drugs. He murdered, first of all, his girlfriend, who was pregnant with his child. Then he murdered her 2 young children. And then he murdered the school friend of one of the children who was staying over. This all took place in the Derbyshire town of Killamarsh in September 2021. He also confessed to the rape of one of the children, a little girl.
I don't know what happened.
Alright, come to me. Mate, have you got anything on you that you shouldn't have?
No, there's no weapons or nothing.
Right.
Do you just want them to do your coat? Have you armed yourself?
Yeah.
You have?
Have you stabbed yourself, mate?
I can see blood on your hands.
Yeah.
Anywhere else?
Just my chest, 4 inches in with a bread knife.
Can we have a look?
And 1 on the stomach. I bled quite.
Right, do you want?
Yeah. Can we go down?
No, just stay there.
I just don't want to be in front of her.
Alright, just go on the corner.
Just walking wounded at the minute.
Alright, stand here. See ya.
Right.
So,
We're told, I know what's going to happen to you now, mate.
Well, I know it's going to happen
just
when you go to prison, obviously, but again,
Wow, what have you done? Have you done something to anyone else?
yeah,
What have you done?
I've murdered 4 people.
07:47 hours. I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence. Do not mention when questioned something later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Your arrest is necessary to protect you from harm, to prevent your disappearance, for a prompt and effective investigation. Okay? We're going to get you up, we're going to put you in the back of the van.
Recently, he's been involved in some kind of violence at the prison that he is being held in. It was over some workshop equipment, some, really harmful equipment, and he attacked someone with it. When I heard about that on TikTok, I looked at the comments of the TikTok and everyone was saying the same thing. Why are you letting somebody who killed 4 people, including 3 children, anywhere near workshop tools that can cause harm or death to others? Bendall got his whole life order in 2022. I'm not sure how the police missed, in their body search of Louis Dyce when they were arresting him, the gun that he had on him. With that gun inside the police station down in Croydon, he shot and killed police officer Sergeant Matt Ratana.
Stand up, mate.
He's been a bit.
Go on.
Not understand.
I think this is it.
I understand, stand up.
So please leave.
What?
Can you please leave? I think I'm going to pass on.
Okay, listen to me. I don't think you are, mate. My name's Matt, I'm the custody officer, right? I'm in charge. I'm not involved in the investigation. You've been arrested on suspicion of possession of bullets, ammunition and possession of intent to supply.
Class B.
Class B, anything else?
That's it.
Alright, your detention's not been authorised yet, but I can authorise a search of you under section 54 of PACE. Stand up. Mate, you were good enough to...
With the 4 shots that he fired from what was in fact the antique gun that he'd managed to retain on his person, he hit Sergeant Ratana in the chest and leg. He got his whole life order in 2023.
This was a cruel, calculated and cynical campaign of child murder involving the smallest and most vulnerable of children, knowing that your actions were causing significant physical suffering and would cause untold mental suffering.
For murdering 7 newborn babies and attempting to murder a further 8, former neonatal nurse Lucy Letby is doing a record 15 whole life prison sentences. Everyone always talks about how normal Lucy Letby seemed to everyone. She had a good circle of friends, a great social life, went on holidays with her colleagues at work. People liked her well enough. She had a bit of a fling with a married doctor. She worked at the Countess of Chester Hospital and she murdered babies and attempted to murder them by injecting insulin and air into their bloodstream. Lucy Letby's murder trial lasted nearly a year. It finished in summer 2023 and Letby got 14 whole life orders. The following year, she got her 15th whole life order following a retrial of one of the murder charges, or it was either a murder charge or a charge of attempted murder. Either way, she was convicted. There are lots of people who say that Lucy Letby is a scapegoat. The deaths of those newborn babies, who I think were all premature, were due to clinical errors of other people. She keeps appealing. Her story, I think, will continue to unravel for many years to come. Lawrence Burton, who was born in 1959, is a triple murderer. On the 25th of June 1995, 79-year-old Aileen Duddell and her 72-year-old sister Elsie Gregory discovered their gardeners, Lawrence Bearton and Michael Pluck, stealing from them. Bearton and Pluck reacted by bludgeoning and suffocating the sisters to death. They then piled the sisters' living room furniture over the bodies of their victims and set everything on fire. Both men were jailed for life at Sheffield Crown Court in 1996. In February 2012, Pluck died in prison. Bearton, however, was released from prison on licence in 2017. He was recalled to prison in 2018 but released on licence once again in 2020. On the 9th of November 2021 in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, Bearton battered his 73-year-old neighbour, Pauline Quinn, to death with her own coffee table. The cause of death was traumatic head injuries. Bearton's abuse of drug and alcohol was considered by the prosecution to be a contributing factor to the man's acts. Bearton got his whole life order in 2023. In November 2024, double murderer Marcus Osborne lost his appeal to have his whole life order overturned. Osborne killed his former girlfriend and her new partner in 2023 in the month of May in Huddersfield out of sexual jealousy. His ex-girlfriend, a lady called Katie Highton, who was 27, sustained all of 99 injuries in the attack from Osborne, while her new boyfriend, a guy called Mr. Harnett, was mutilated and left with 24 knife wounds. Osborne also raped another woman who he had held captive in the house. Osborne got his whole life order in early 2024.
Right, start the same thing at the moment, but in my army defence, I'm answering questions, substitute on the court, telling you to do something with evidence. Anything you say now is evidential, alright?
I know he's on sword country.
Brian Whitelock, who comes from Swansea in Wales, is another triple murderer. His first two victims were Nicky Morgan and Glenn Whitelock. Glenn was his own brother. He killed them in the course of a drink and drugs party over at the home of Nicky Morgan. When he got out, he then was befriended by a lady called Wendy Buckney. She was a 71-year-old lady. She loved her horses. She knew about Brian Whitelock's past, but she believed that everyone deserved a second chance. One day, under the influence of drink and drugs again, just like in the case of his first two murders, he went over to Wendy Buckney's home, battered her, did something sexual against her, and then after he finished battering her to death with all kinds of things, including some shelving, he loaded a pile of furniture and things over her body and walked away. He got his whole life prison order in 2024. Stephen Sansom is a double murderer. His first murder came in Christmas 1998, where he killed a taxi driver just for a few quid. He rammed a kitchen knife, I think, into the guy's neck, and then he destroyed the man's mobile phone to make sure that he couldn't call for help. Then he got out, and for a year or two he was fine, didn't get into any trouble, but he kept taking drugs. He got involved with a woman called Gemma Watts, and she was just as bad as him. She liked to BDSM. She used to let Sansom beat the CRAP out of her, and between the two of them they plotted that they would get a woman to come over and hack her to bits or kill her in some way. So then one day they got an ex-girlfriend, or somebody at least that Sansom had dated for a while, by the name of Sarah Mayhew, who in fact was the one who introduced Gemma to Sansom. It's not known exactly what they did to her to cause her death, because when several weeks later her body was found, it was all in pieces and it was very badly decomposed, so it was impossible to trace exactly what had been done to her. Gemma got 30 years for Sarah Mayhew's murder because that was her first murder. In the case of Sansom, however, it was his second murder which led him to getting a whole life order. That came in early 2025.
The evidence I have heard shows you to be a jealous man, soaked in self-pity, a man who holds women in utter contempt.
That's putting it mildly, Mr. Justice Benethan. This is the judge who sentenced Kyle Clifford for the 3 horrendous murders that he committed on the 9th of July 2024, his sentencing having come in March 2025. This triple killer is going to cost the taxpayer millions because he's paralysed. That means in prison he needs lots of extra care. He paralysed himself in a failed suicide attempt that he made just before he got arrested for the murder of his ex-girlfriend Louise Hunt, her mother Carol, and another sister in the family, Hannah. He committed those murders in the home of his ex-girlfriend on the 9th of July 2024. In addition, he raped Louise and held her captive for 2 hours before murdering her, and the judge of his trial said it must have become obvious to Louise in the course of her captivity that Clifford had already killed her mother.
This is no occasion to subject the family and friends of your victims to any delay or suspense. I therefore make clear at once that for each of these 3 murders, the sentence will be one of life imprisonment with a whole life order. That means a sentence from which you will never be released.
And let me clarify that at the time of his sentencing, Clifford was in his 20s. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.